Matthew Brady. Screencast-O-Matic by Odell Turnbull for Com 235 Media History. Matthew Brady, a well-known nickname of his was Brady of Broadway. Brady was born in 1822. He moved to New York in 1836, where he lived. Not just in New York, that was his primary residency, but he traveled all over, as we'll get into, but lived in New York until his death on January 15th, 1896, where he died in a hospital. He was one of the earliest American photographers. He studied under William Page and Samuel Morse, two very well-known artists and photographers of the time. So you could say he was in pretty good hands coming up in his time as becoming a photographer. One of the biggest things Brady was known for, if not the biggest, was that he helped give political notice during the Civil War. We'll get into that too. But he also held art galleries and took pictures of celebrities and presidents, which we'll also get into. To start with, Brady's gallery. He began his career making daguerreotype cases and frames. He actually opened a studio doing that in 1844, while he was still, coming up as a photographer. He expanded off of that, taking pictures of celebrities. Some of the famous people he took photos of was, guys like people like Edgar Allan Poe and etc. This photo here on the right is actually one that he took of Abraham Lincoln, and he had a collection of presidents through his time that he would take photos for and put up in his different galleries. He opened his second gallery in 1858, and this was the big one because it was where he really started to put all the figureheads that he was taking photos of into this gallery, and a lot of those photos became, immense influence on, the times, because it was beginning times of photography and film and things like that. So he was a fountainhead for that. The thing that, like I said earlier, that Brady was most famous for was his following and photo taking of the Civil War. But he didn't do it just by himself. It was Brady's corps of Civil War photographers. He hired a bunch of guys, including people like Alexander Gardner and so forth, that he hired to take photos because he wanted to document a complete record of the conflict of the Civil War. It was known as his greatest success, but it didn't become his success until later in life, and we'll get into that. Well, not even later in his life, but later in history. So he basically hired a bunch of these photographers that would go to different battle places and war zones and take photos and try to record everything that they could throughout the fighting of the Civil War. How the soldiers were living, how the fighting was going. Anything between, death to recovery. As it says here, it was one of the greatest collective depictions in photography of a major historical event, and that's ever. This did hurt Brady financially. He invested a lot of money into this project, and at the time, it did not pay dividends because of the situation that the country was in and just the culture of how America was. At the time, it wasn't history; it was present. So it didn't really lift off the way he thought it would. Um, he actually would do most of his work would be him, organizing the photographers and things like that. But he did go to battles of Bull Run and Gettysburg, where he did take photos himself. Brady lost over $100,000 in this process. Um, you know, he ended up getting a partial bailout by the government in 1875, where they gave him about 25,000, but it just didn't do much for him. And after this, it's crazy. After this great success that he had doing this, it actually put him in a hole. And um, you know, after a couple years, he was forgotten for it and died alone in a hospital bed. But as you can see now, it paid more dividends after his death for him and for this country, because of all the work he did. He was just ahead of his time almost in regards of taking photos of celebrities, and then recording an event such as the Civil War. So that is Matthew Brady.